symbolic passing of the gavel, but I want to convey my commitment and expectation that as we move forward, we'll continue to work together in a bipartisan manner on the vital issues that come before this committee. In the last Congress, that bipartisan approach led to more than 50 public laws being enacted out of this committee. This cooperative spirit will extend to the confirmation process for President Biden's nominees to lead the departments and agencies within our jurisdiction. And I am absolutely delighted today that the first of these nominees submitted for our consideration is Mayor Pete Buttigieg to be Secretary of Transportation. Mayor Buttigieg has impressive credentials which demonstrate his intellect and commitment to serving our nation. As a former local elected official, he will bring a valuable perspective to the Department of Transportation regarding the transportation infrastructure needs and challenges of towns and cities throughout our country. His educational background as a Harvard graduate and Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University will serve our country well as we address our nation's transportation policy priorities. I also want to thank him for his service as an intelligence officer in the U.S. Navy Reserve. I also at this point want to thank outgoing former Secretary of Transportation Elaine Chao for the professional and principled manner in which she has directed the department for the past 4 years, and I salute her on her accomplishments as once again a member of a presidential cabinet. I look forward to hearing from Mayor Buttigieg today on his and President Biden's goals for the Department of Transportation. Should he be confirmed as Secretary, and I'm quite certain he will be confirmed. I know this is only the beginning of our dialogue about key matters, including implementation of the momentous COVID legislation passed by Congress, which provides assistance to key transportation sectors, such as aviation, infrastructure investment on how to improve infrastructure in small towns and rural communities, including using financing tools such as advanced refunding or creating taxable infrastructure bonds, promoting transportation safety in coordination with state and local governments and other stakeholders, further advancing transportation innovation, including autonomous vehicles and drones, building upon our transportation networks, including our ports, highways, and rail systems, including our national passenger rail system, Amtrak. And in that connection, addressing one of my top priorities, restoring Amtrak service along the Gulf Coast, where it was halted after Hurricane Katrina some 15 years ago. These issues are significant for all Mississippians and all Washingtonians and all Americans, and I'm grateful that Mayor Buttigieg is here today to provide his views, and I'm grateful that he is willing to serve. I want to thank Mayor Buttigieg for testifying today, and at this point, I turn to my dear friend and colleague, the soon-to-be chair of this committee, Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly appreciate the great collegial working relationship that we have established thus far, and I look forward to growing it in this Congress. As you know, we were able to work together productively and pass landmark aviation safety legislation and many other pieces of legislation, including a Coast Guard bill that moved out of this committee and then on to other moving legislation and successfully implemented into law. So thank you for that productivity among other legislative priorities. I do want to take a second, since we have both the members of our committee who were able to successfully pull off yesterday's celebration, just thank Senators Blunt and Klobuchar for getting us safely through yesterday and having it the magnificent celebration that it was.
Hear, hear.
And look forward to working with them. And certainly want to, again, thank, as you mentioned, Secretary Chao for her work on many transportation priorities. I think this committee is a hallmark of bipartisan cooperation. A lot of the subjects we deal with are just hard problems to solve, and we've been able to continue to work together in a bipartisan fashion, so I hope that will continue. And I think transportation, of all the sectors that we deal with, transportation should be one of those, which we should be able to use facts and information and come together on priorities. So I am very excited that the president has nominated Mayor Pete Buttigieg to run the transportation agency. And I look forward to his vision in leading that Department of Transportation. As a mayor, I know you're no stranger to the challenges that a region faces on transportation infrastructure issues. I know that you earned national recognition for your Smart Streets project that created a safe environment for all road users. The project resulted in over $100 million in private sector investment. You used your experience as mayor to help forge that, and I hope that you will do that for communities across the United States of America. For us in the state of Washington, we're a big export state. Not only do we export our own products, so everything from cherries and wheat and apples and airplanes, but we also are a big pass-through for many of the Midwest agricultural products reaching Asian destinations. So to say that we need infrastructure investment is an understatement. The growth of the Pacific and the demand for U.S. products is a good problem to have. We just need to deal with the bottlenecks. And congestion in Puget Sound is at record levels. We need to address projects like the I-5 Columbia River Bridge replacement, the West Seattle Bridge replacement, the North-South Corridor in Spokane, and we need to make infrastructure investment all around the United States of America, including in public transportation. Projects like Sound Transit are facing a $1 billion shortfall as a result of COVID-19, which jeopardizes the much-needed investment throughout Puget Sound. Today marks the one-year anniversary of the first case of the COVID pandemic, with a man from Everett, Washington, being tested positive. One of the most impacted sectors in the United States, not the only sector, but one of the most impacted sectors in the United States has been transportation. The chairman alluded to the fact that this committee played a very aggressive role in trying to come up with solutions for the impacts to the transportation sector, whether that was aviation or most recently with infrastructure and with Amtrak. But that will continue. The needs to move product and people will continue whether we have a COVID pandemic or not, and so I hope that you will help us in facing these shortfalls. I also want to point out that, as I mentioned, the movement of freight is particularly important, and we will look forward to your leadership in moving improved ways to move freight around the United States. I continue to think that the legislation that ended up being in the InfraGrant program was very helpful to states across the United States. And I just want to mention the fact that aviation safety and security and the legislation that this committee passed and was implemented into law has to now be administered by the Department of Transportation and the FAA. So we're going to be looking for your leadership, your success in holding them accountable to the many aspects of that legislation and helping us move forward. If we want to be the leaders in the United States of America on aviation, we have to be the leaders in aviation safety as well. So we'll look for your leadership on that. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm excited about this nominee's ability to help us focus on transportation issues and look forward to seeing his leadership at the department. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Klobuchar. And at this point, it is my pleasure to recognize our distinguished colleague from the state of Indiana, a member of this committee, Senator Young, to introduce our witness today.
Well, hello, Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Cantwell, members of the committee. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce a fellow Hoosier as President Biden's nominee for Secretary of Transportation, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Pete and I have known one another for a number of years. He's a professional friend and colleague and someone for whom I have a great deal of respect. On the off chance that members of this committee were not paying attention during the 2020 presidential Democratic primaries, I'll quickly recap Mayor Buttigieg's background. Pete was born in South Bend, Indiana, where he went on to serve as mayor for 2 terms from 2012 to 2020. And as mayor, he invested in important infrastructure improvements and facilitated public-private partnerships that made those dollars go much further. Indiana's long been a leader in these public-private partnerships, a model that will be very important for future infrastructure investments. Mayor Buttigieg was also a supporter of the South Shore Double Track project, whose full funding grant agreement was signed earlier this month. Like many state and local projects, the Department of Transportation awards funding toward the South Shore Double Track required remarkable coordination between federal, state, and local leaders to make the project a reality and to get it across the finish line. While mayor, he also served our country as a United States Navy reservist from 2009 to 2017, including a deployment to Afghanistan in 2014. He's a graduate of Harvard College, 2004, and he attended Oxford on a Rhodes Scholarship. Transportation is a vital sector to the Hoosier State. We're in the top 10 states when it comes to railroad mileage. We have world-class airports, 66 public transit systems, 3 ports, and our state motto is the crossroads of America. I've traveled tens of thousands of miles on those roads, and I know Pete has as well. If Mayor Buttigieg is confirmed, and I believe he will be, I hope he will be, I look forward to working with him and my colleagues here on this committee to maintain and improve the infrastructure that drives the American economy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very, very much, Senator Young and Mr. Mayor. You are recognized for your opening statement. Delighted to have you.
Thank you very much. Member Cantwell, members of the committee, it's a real honor to be able to appear before you as nominee for the Secretary of Transportation. And let me begin just first by thanking my home state Senator Young for your kind introduction, for your service to our shared home state and to our country, and to your attention to South Bend during the time that I was mayor. Thank you. I want to thank President Biden for trusting me with this nomination. And I'd like to take a moment to introduce my husband, Chasten Buttigieg, who's here with me today. I'm really proud to have him by my side. I also want to take this chance to thank him for his many sacrifices and his support in making it possible for me to pursue public service. Today, I hope to present to you my goals for the Department of Transportation, to share a little bit about myself, and of course to hear from you about your priorities for the department, the issues that you consider important for your constituents and for our country. First and foremost, I want you to know that if confirmed, I will work every day to make sure the department meets its mission of ensuring safety. Safety for both travelers and for workers, and I look forward to working closely with Congress to do so. Safety is the foundation of the department's mission, and that takes on new meaning amid this pandemic. We have to ensure that all of our transportation systems, our aviation and public transit, our railways, roads, ports, our waterways and pipelines, all of it is managed safely in this critical period as we work to defeat the virus for good. We also have a lot of work to do to improve the infrastructure in this country, a mission that will not only keep more people safe, but will grow our economy as we look to the future. Now is the time, and I believe we have a real chance to deliver for the American people. We need to build our economy back better than ever, and the Department of Transportation can play a central role in this by implementing President Biden's infrastructure vision, by creating millions of good-paying jobs, revitalizing communities that have been left behind, enabling American small businesses, workers, families, and farmers to compete and win in the global economy, and tackling the climate crisis. Infrastructure can be the cornerstone to all of this, and you have my commitment that I will work closely with you to deliver the innovation and the growth that America needs in this area. As a mayor from the industrial Midwest, I will bring a bottom-up perspective on transportation programs and funding. If confirmed, I'm looking forward to working with our partners at the state, local, territorial, and tribal levels as well to find solutions to our infrastructure issues while we also prepare for the future of transportation at a time of great change. When I took office as mayor of South Bend, a city built by the power of American transportation, we had been hit so hard by economic loss that some in the national press listed us as one of America's dying cities. As our city fought its way out of the teeth of the Great Recession, infrastructure was at the heart of our vision for a better future. As mayor, I worked with public and private partners to launch a Smart Streets initiative that brought new life to our urban core and to the historically underserved west side of our city, revitalizing our downtown, redesigning streets, and spurring hundreds of millions in major economic investment. I worked with regional and state partners and across the aisle to support enhancements to our intercity train system that Senator Young mentioned, the South Shore Line, and our now international airport, as we pioneered public-private partnerships at the same time, like Commuters Trust, a benefits program to improve the city's transportation experience for workers. We got results by bringing people in, engaging stakeholders and residents, prioritizing limited funds effectively, and unlocking new resources to solve problems. And that is how I will approach the Department of Transportation if confirmed. I believe good transportation policy can play no less a role than making possible the American dream, getting people and goods to where they need to be, directly and indirectly creating good-paying jobs. But I also recognize that, at their worst, misguided policies and missed opportunities in transportation can reinforce racial and economic inequality by dividing or isolating neighborhoods and undermining government's basic role of empowering Americans to thrive. So much is at stake today, and so much is possible as our country works to emerge from the crises of this moment with bipartisan appetite for a generational opportunity to transform and improve America's infrastructure. So the chance to lead this department at this historic moment is not one that I take lightly, and if confirmed, I promise to bring the same sense of duty and commitment that led me to serve my hometown as mayor and that motivated me to serve our country in the Navy Reserve. To conclude, Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Cantwell, members of the committee, I am eager to get to work, and if confirmed, look forward to partnering with this committee and with Congress. And I look forward to your questions now.
Thank you very much, Mayor Buttigieg, and we will begin questions under the 5-minute rule. First of all, let's talk about passenger rail and about Amtrak. The Secretary of Transportation or his or her designee serves as a member of the Amtrak Board of Directors, which has 10 members. The U.S. Department of Transportation also is responsible for administering federal grants to Amtrak and overseeing intercity passenger rail policy. As I mentioned in my opening statement, a priority of mine has been restoration of the Gulf Coast Rail Service, which we've been waiting for some 15 years. This is an undertaking that I and many others have been working on. And in 2019, the Southern Rail Commission received a CRISI grant award of $33 million for this project, but there is much more to do. Mayor Buttigieg, early in your term as secretary, would you have an interest in coming to Mississippi to see the Gulf Coast route from New Orleans through the Gulf Coast of Mississippi and on to Mobile?
I would. Thank you for the invitation, Chairman. I'd love the opportunity.
And if confirmed, would you be committed to working with me to reinstate Amtrak service after this long 15-year hiatus?
I look forward to working with you, to learning more. As you know, I'm probably only the second biggest passenger rail enthusiast in this particular administration.
I think you discussed that with me and elaborated on it during our conversation over the phone. You enjoy actually traveling on Amtrak.
I do. I enjoy long train trips as well as short ones, and I think that Americans ought to be able to enjoy the highest standard of passenger rail service.
Mr. Mayor, this committee will consider multimodal transportation discretionary grant programs when it reauthorizes our surface transportation programs. Grant programs like build grants, infra, and the port program play an important role in addressing infrastructure needs across the country and are particularly critical for small towns and rural communities. If confirmed, how do you plan to utilize these programs to ensure rural communities are not left behind?
So build, infra, and other grant programs are, I believe, a central part of how we're going to be able to deliver on that goal of enhancing infrastructure resources for all Americans. And I recognize, especially coming from a community of the size of South Bend, knowing that they're smaller communities than ours, but also at our size. We're not among those that were able to have a full-time staff working on federal relations. It's very important to me to make sure that this process is user-friendly, that criteria are transparent, and that communities of every size, including rural communities and smaller communities, have every opportunity to access that funding.
If you could spend the next 2 minutes elaborating, and perhaps you'll have a chance later on with other senators, on our new president's vision for a massive infrastructure program and how he intends to propose that we pay for this.
So this is, I think, our opportunity to literally do the building part in Build Back Better. And of course, there are a lot of conversations that still need to happen, not only within the administration, but with members of this committee and the Congress on exactly how to shape, how to time, and how to fund that opportunity. But a lot of this also is part and parcel of what has to happen by way of the economic recovery that this administration needs to support and drive in the wake of COVID. I mean, Chairman.
Please go ahead, yes.
Well, that means making sure that every part of our transportation infrastructure gets those kinds of investment. And I believe that there are certainly challenges in funding any of the different modes of transportation. For example, we know that the Highway Trust Fund has more going out than coming in, but for the regular transfers from general fund that are being authorized by this Congress. I think we need to develop more sustainable and predictable means of delivering that kind of funding. It's a major challenge and one that can't be answered outside of the context of a partnership with Congress. But I also think there's a historic opportunity in terms of the support that I've heard from members of this committee on both sides of the aisle in our conversations and from the public to actually put together the resources to make those kinds of investments, whether we're talking about trains, planes, and automobiles or next generation transportation opportunities.
Subject for much more conversation over the next few weeks and months. Thank you very much. Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I'm going to try to go through a whole variety of things as quick as possible. So just if you can help me out there, that would be great. One, just want to clarify, the chairman did a great job of talking about infra and build and your support for it. Do you think we need a significant investment in that? I look at what, in 2018, we were 18.9 trillion worth of goods shipped in the United States, and that is expected to increase by 40%. So I look at that and say that's part of our economic strategy, get exports, get them to market quickly. So would you say we need a significant increase in those programs, infra and build?
Absolutely, there needs to be a major investment in order to deliver.
Okay. Would you say that the issue of at-grade crossings is also an issue that might need more attention? We just had a derailment in the Northwest. We have a lot of traffic moving through our communities, and we hear constantly about safety issues. Do you think that at-grade crossings need more attention?
Yes.
Okay. On aviation, I mentioned worth of goods shipped in the United States, and that is expected to increase by 40%. So I look at that and say that's part of our economic strategy, get exports, get them to market quickly. So would you say we need a significant increase in those programs, infra and build?
Absolutely, there needs to be a major investment in order to deliver.
Okay. Would you say that the issue of at-grade crossings is also an issue that might need more attention? We just had a derailment in the Northwest. We have a lot of traffic moving through our communities, And we hear constantly about safety issues. Do you think that at-grade crossings need more attention?
Yes.
Okay. On aviation, I mentioned in my opening statement about the issues of the legislation we passed and getting the FAA to do its oversight role. There was a report by rank and file FAA employees that 49% of the employees responded indicating they believe safety concerns or incidents were not being addressed, and that 43% believe the FAA delegated too much. So we've tried to focus our attention here on that issue. But in describing the engagement with aviation, one FAA employee said, "It feels like I'm showing up to a knife fight with Nerf weapons." So I want to know that you will make the safety reforms at the FAA a priority.
I'm committed to doing so. We need to make sure that engineers and the FAA are in the driver's seat when it comes to safety, and we'll be working right away to implement the legislation that you've advanced with regard to ensuring that we have every confidence in safety at the FAA.
Are you willing to make changes in personnel if necessary?
Yes.
Thank you. Want to go back to transportation again. Sorry, here, got a lot of things. We want to ask you about the one primary tool for DOT to support transit agency is the Capital Investment Grant Program. Would you support increasing a federal share of funding for grants to the recently approved project to ensure the pandemic does not halt or delay transportation investments?
I'll certainly want to take a look at this. I think often we have not created as much predictability in capital planning as we have on the operational side, and I'd be eager to look at how we can better fund that.
Okay, and back to aviation manufacturing, my colleague, I'm sure will be here sometime today, Senator Moran. Chairman Wicker mentioned a lot of the COVID dollars that were set to focus on aerospace and to focus on aerospace manufacturing. We want to make sure that aerospace manufacturing impacted again because of the lack of demand in air travel. We don't lose that skill and workforce. So we want to know that you will help us make aviation manufacturing a priority and making sure that retaining a workforce in the United States is as important as retaining the workforce that we see in our air transportation today on the flights and flight attendants and pilots.
Certainly, it's important both economically and strategically for the country, so you have my commitment.
Thank you. And then lastly, I am a big Jones Act supporter, and the state of Washington and the trade that we have related to the Jones Act to make sure that we have U.S. flagged vessels. Sometimes it gets under attack, but I just want to hear that you support the Jones Act.
Yes, I share your support for the Jones Act. It is so important to a maritime industry that creates hundreds of thousands of jobs, as well as a shipbuilding industry here in the U.S.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I think that Senator Thune.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mayor, thanks for being here today. As this committee considers your nomination for Secretary of Transportation, transportation infrastructure investment around here has always been an area for bipartisan cooperation, as evidenced by passage of the FAST Act, which enjoyed wide popularity in Congress and among the states. The other thing that enjoys bipartisan popularity around here is not paying for it. You know, we continue to just put it on the debt and hand the bill to our kids and grandkids. And I know this isn't the place for you to get specific about ways to pay for it. You'd be crazy to do that at a hearing like this. But I just want to put on your radar screen that these investments that we want to make in roads and bridges and highways and all those things, we have to address the issue of how we finance it. The Environment and Public Works Committee reported a bill out last session of Congress, 21-0 out of the committee. It increased funding for highways by 28%. And the reason it came out 21-0 is because they don't have to pay for it. It's all the spending side of it. At some point, and I also serve on the Senate Finance Committee, we have to figure out how we're going to pay for it. And it's going to take presidential leadership. It's going to take bipartisan cooperation in the Congress in order to make that happen. The FAST Act did include strong investments in rural America, which are critical for states like South Dakota that rely on federal investment in transportation infrastructure to ensure the efficient flow of goods to domestic and global markets. Freight corridors within rural areas are a critical component of the national transportation system. Those investments benefit the entire country, not just the rural areas. Highways and railroads in rural regions need to be connected to our nation's major cities, which need the many products that originate in places like the heartland, and we had this conversation. So it's crucial, in my view, that transportation policy and investment continue to recognize the importance of rural areas where the vast majority of agricultural and industrial commodities originate, to keep the transportation system in this country fluid, dynamic, and interconnected. As we previously discussed, I introduced the Rail Rehabilitation Finance Innovation Act along with Senator Hassan last Congress, and it takes important steps to improve the RIF credit review process and increase utilization of the program by short-line railroads. Small connector lines in rural states like South Dakota provide a critical service to farmers. They carry grain, ethanol, and other products from terminals to Class 1 main lines. If confirmed, and as we work to move this legislation during the 117th Congress, can you describe how you would approach improvements to freight rail policy and investment?
Well, I look forward to working with you to learn more and develop this. As you mentioned, this is one of the few infrastructure programs that's actually undersubscribed, and so it points to the need for more work to be done. And I think it's very important for all of the reasons that you just described, important to my home state as well, and so many communities that we act on that.
Okay. South Dakota has 9 tribal reservations, many of them large and sparsely populated, where tribal roads provide a crucial transportation link to many communities. For this reason, I introduced the Tribal Transportation Equity and Transparency Improvement Act, that's a mouthful, with Senator Sinema last Congress. And among other provisions, the bill seeks to improve and update data on tribal roads, which is a critical aspect of ensuring funds are allocated where they are needed most. Do you agree that tribal road funding should be allocated according to the most up-to-date data?
I do.
Would you commit to working with me in this Congress to ensure that this important program is improved?
I'd welcome that opportunity.
Thank you. Let me just mention one other issue here, which I think, and this is something that state DOTs, particularly in rural areas like South Dakota, deal with, and that's the lack of resources to comply with a lot of the burdensome federal administrative requirements. The FAST Act included several provisions that were aimed at easing administrative burdens for state DOTs, and the Bipartisan America's Transportation Infrastructure Act, which, as I said, was unanimously approved by the Environment and Public Works Committee in the last Congress, built on that success to provide state DOTs with greater flexibility to manage their transportation networks. Should the federal government work with state DOTs to provide them the flexibility that they need to build and maintain our nation's transportation infrastructure?
So I believe any time that we can make federal processes more user-friendly for states or local or tribal partners, we should. And when we find that anything is duplicative or burdensome, would welcome finding ways to streamline that, provided, of course, that we're meeting the fundamental goals of those rules, safety, environmental, or otherwise.
Right, okay. I just hope that we can continue to build on some of the successes that were made in the last highway bill to allow as much as flexibility as possible so states can get the most resources on the target. And I look forward to working with you on that, and I see my time has expired. So, Madam Chair, I yield back. Mayor, welcome.
Thank you.
Senator Klobuchar.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Cantwell, and thank you to Senator Wicker. Welcome, Mayor Pete. I want to thank you for being here. I think you know how excited I am about your nomination and what a great transportation secretary you will be. I know you well, and I can attest to all my colleagues what a forward-thinking and thoughtful secretary you will truly be in a very important area for all of us and for our nation. And John and I also look forward to seeing you and Chasten in a less formal setting outside of this hearing room. And I appreciated what you said about transportation safety. It was in my state that the 35W bridge collapsed in the middle of a summer day. Bridge just shouldn't fall down in the middle of America. We lost 13 people and many injured. And I guess I would start with that. Can you talk about your priorities for safety? You mentioned to the chairwoman, and I agree, incoming chairwoman, and I agree with her about rail crossings, aviation. But maybe you want to mention bridges a little. You and I talked about the Blotnick Bridge going from Duluth to Superior, Wisconsin, the second largest bridge in my state that needs rehabilitation. We need to do work on that. Just any comments you have on bridge safety as well as in general?
Yes, first of all, thanks for the kind words and the warm welcome. And I agree. I remember how outspoken you were at the time of that bridge collapse, and that just shouldn't happen, as you've said. And so often, states and counties, other local governments are expected to maintain these bridges, but don't have the resources to do it. And so it's another example of how we need a major and significant investment as a safety concern to enhance, upgrade, and maintain bridges and other key critical infrastructure assets across the country.
That is not going to be all under your jurisdiction. The one important piece of it is, which is how we figure out as we invest in more broadband, which we know we so sorely need through this pandemic and before, and I know you've devoted a lot of thought to this, but we also, when we do road construction, we can do a better job of laying the broadband lines at the same time. It's called dig once, and I wonder what thoughts you have on that.
Yeah, this is very important in my own community. Parts of South Bend have phenomenal broadband fiber connectivity for the simple reason that somebody remembered to lay conduit alongside some of the railway and highway right-of-ways that connected us to Chicago to the west. And so even if this is being driven by another department, I would welcome the opportunity to make sure that DOT's side of the equation is open to supporting that broadband deployment because it's so important in so many communities.
One thing I know you also understand is the rural areas. You have big rural areas in Indiana, and the Senator Thune touched on this a bit, but for build grants, capital investment grants, just talk about your priorities to making sure those go out in rural areas. We have a lot. I see Senator Tester here, a lot of senators here with areas with significant rural areas.
So several things I think we can do to make sure that rural communities have access and equitable access to those grants. One is to make them more user-friendly. Another is to ensure that the criteria are very clear and that there's feedback. We know how it is for my community to be a runner-up sometimes in these processes, and the better your feedback is, the more you can come back the next time and have a better shot at it. Of course, the more resources go in to begin with, the more folks can get that favorable answer right away.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes I think going back to what used to be called earmarks, they could be called congressionally initiated projects, would be helpful, especially for some of the rural areas, because we have a good sense of what's going on in our states. You have done the work with, which was brought up before, Smart Streets, your initiative to help improve safety, revitalize downtown South Bend. And actually, on a bipartisan basis, I've been leading that recreational trails program funding. Thank you for the note about my hair sticking straight up, Doug. That was nice. Thank you. That was really nice and subtle. But in any case, the recreational trails project is something that it would be, actually the program applies to both recreational vehicles that are non-motorized and motorized, like snowmobiles, ATVs, and we've worked this interesting coalition with motorized, non-motorized for bikes and other things as well. So could you talk a little bit about that? That funding has been really important, especially in this pandemic where people are looking for recreation like that.
Yes, and thanks for your leadership on this. There are so many ways that people get around, and I think often we've had an auto-centric view that has forgotten historically about all of the other different modes. And we want to make sure anytime we're doing street design that it enables cars and bicycles and pedestrians and businesses and any other mode to coexist in a positive way, and we should be putting funding behind that.
All right. Excellent. Well, as I said, we're excited that you are willing to serve and look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Blunt.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. Mayor, glad to have you here today. Good to have a chance to talk the other day. And as you and I discussed, where you live and where I live, I think we have a unique view of the transportation hubs of the country and how important transportation is to our economies. I've got about 4 minutes and 45 seconds here, so let me see if I can cover for our 5 topics. One, in the FAST Act, I worked to secure a provision there that directed the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation to provide railroad right-of-way the same general provision we give to highways. In other words, if a railroad has been there, just like if a highway has been there, you don't have to go through all of the historic view of whether you should continue to have a railroad there. And so we passed that bill. The council really has failed to provide the relief that was contemplated, so we passed it again in December. We put language in December to the council, do what the Congress told you they needed to do, you needed to do in this area. And again, almost exactly similar to what happens in highways. If confirmed, do I have your commitment to work with me and the Federal Railroad Administration to ensure the council provides the general exemption consistent with congressional intent included in the FAST Act?
I'll make sure to work with you to make sure that the congressional intent is met.
Well, I think it's a very logical thing, just like it was logical for highways. It is a different consideration when you're putting something back or repairing something or making an improvement where a railroad has already been, just like where a highway's been. Another topic I think you'd have particular understanding of where the experience you've had as mayor and working with other mayors, essential air service and contract towers. They're important to the ability to have an aviation ecosystem. Many people on this committee are affected by those two things, the essential air service program and the contract tower program. If you have any concerns about those programs not moving forward, I'd like to know that now. But otherwise, I'd just like your sense that you understand the importance of these programs, what they mean to communities where they qualify for them, and the importance of continuing to look at these as principal pillars of our aviation system for those sizes of communities.
Yes, I've been hearing a lot about EAS from you and your colleagues and recognize how important that is, also to communities not too far from where I live. And so I believe that that kind of support has every reason to continue to enjoy an important place in our transportation policy.
Exactly. And, you know, both of the communities where you live and I live and the states where we live, trucking's been an important part of this for a long time. Doesn't mean we don't need to do things to have better intermodal opportunities. You know, the rail hubs we have the second and third biggest rail hubs in America are Kansas City and St. Louis. The interstate highways come together in our state as they do in yours in unique ways. The patchwork of laws that could concern that interstate competition and interstate commerce. One of the principal reasons given to have the Constitution is to facilitate that. A patchwork of different laws from trucks moving from one state to another, incredibly complicated. I raised this issue in 2018 with Secretary Chow, and she was able in 2018 to use specific authority Congress gave the Secretary. She used it to narrowly preempt California rules about meals and rest breaks that were different than the rules where these trucks were coming from. They had been wrongly applied to interstate motor carriers. She used that rule for preemption of the state law in this circumstance. The Ninth Circuit last week unanimously upheld her determination that this is something that the Secretary could do and did appropriately. My hope is that this issue is now settled, but you know, we've discussed it, we've debated it, we've now litigated it. I think it's really important that we don't have a patchwork of rules that someone driving a truck, that's the way they make their living, going across the country, has to worry about when they cross a state line, what happens to them based on the state they were just in. Do you have any Thoughts about that?
So I'd want to look more into some of the specific case law you're discussing, but certainly recognize the importance of consistency, predictability, and the key, of course, is squaring that with that fundamental mission of safety.
Well, and the fundamental mission of safety is not necessarily advantaged by a driver having to think about how quickly they have to get one state so they've got the time they need in another state. You have the authority to do that if you become secretary, and I hope you use that authority as Secretary Chow did and as the Ninth Circuit upheld again just this week. One final topic, and I may have a question or two for the record. In the CARES Act, the Secretary was given the task of overseeing a number of provisions that related to extending support for airports, concessionaires, making sure that services are maintained despite the challenges we've gone through. Will you work with the Congress to authorize and implement programs which help provide a safe workplace for transportation workers, but also which ensure that we have an air system that's still there and a car rental system that's still there when our air travel returns to
such a blow, and they are so important to our economy. I look forward to working with you to make sure we're doing everything we can to support them.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Cantwell.
Thank you. Senator Blumenthal.
Finished. We have in this country an existential crisis in our public transportation system. You are absolutely right. They've taken a blow, and it may be a fatal blow for some of the private companies that provide bus transportation, like DATCO in Connecticut. Airports like Bradley are gravely at risk. Metro North has suffered an 80% decline in ridership. Rail in the Northeast is seriously in danger, fiscally and otherwise, and most important, maybe from a human standpoint, the employees of these transportation networks are seriously at risk right now. And I have sponsored a measure called the Essential Transportation Employee Safety Act, which would provide more personal protective equipment, more testing, hopefully more vaccinations to these flight attendants, train conductors, employees at airports, all of these essential workers who are interacting every day with people who may put them at risk of COVID, and they have suffered serious losses. So I would like your commitment to the safety of these employees. I know it's in your heart. I know you have that sense of caring for them, but we need measures like the one I've proposed and the mask mandate order that the President issued yesterday, which I hope also will be extended to legislation as a national mandate on federal property.
Yes, you have that commitment. In speaking with representatives of workers, we've heard about their exposure to risks from COVID exposure all the way to assault, and we've got to make sure that workers are safe in this field.
On a matter also very close to home for a number of us in the Northeast, you're familiar with the Gateway Project. You and I talked about it in our conversation. Thank you, by the way, for talking to me so extensively the other day. The Gateway program includes the Hudson Tunnel Project. Incredibly, these tunnels are 111 years old. Think of the era when they were built. The technology has changed magnificently. The tunnels are decrepit, degrading, and about to potentially collapse. I'd like your commitment that you will move this project, which is essential to all rail traffic, indeed all transportation in the Northeast. I know you will find a lot of interest on the part of my colleague Senator Schumer and Gillibrand, as well as Murphy and others up and down the Northeast in the Gateway project and particularly the Hudson Tunnel project.
Yes, I've heard this loud and clear from you and your colleagues and counterparts in the region, and look forward to working with you on this to move forward.
And the same really applies to the bridge across the Connecticut River, which is in serious need of repair and even replacement. It's a $550 million project, but I hope it will be included in any broader infrastructure program. And finally, let me just close. My background is as a prosecutor. I believe in enforcing the laws. Around here, we make a lot of laws, but you know, as a former mayor, how important law enforcement is. And the DOT, I'm just going to be very blunt, has failed again and again and again to issue regulations that are necessary to make the law real in people's lives. Under the 2018 FAA Reauthorization Act, Congress required the FAA to issue a rule establishing minimum seat size and legroom standards for commercial flights and review cabin evacuation procedures pertaining to seat size within 1 year. Many of us on this panel were instrumental in passing that law, but the rules to implement it still have not been issued. I would like your commitment that you will devote attention to rulemaking involving are essential to enforcing these laws.
Yes, I'll look into this and make sure that the rulemaking is keeping pace with congressional intent.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think next is Senator Fisher, who is joining us remotely.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell, and thank you, Mr. Buttigieg, for being here today. I, first off, would like to just make a couple comments. Senator Cantwell spoke about the Jones Act, and I am so privileged to represent the state of Nebraska in the United States Senate, and we are the only triple landlocked state in the Union. And I am also a strong supporter of the Jones Act and recognize the need for it, and it is vital for the security of this country. Also, Senator Blunt brought up comments about the recent ruling by the Ninth Circuit, and I would just like to associate myself with his comments. I think it is a decision that is important for the movement of our goods and services, and I believe it is also recognizing the safety involved in that. But it is good to have you here today, Mr. Buttigieg. Last week, NHTSA issued a final rule updating certain definitions in vehicle crashworthiness standards to account for automated and passenger-less vehicles. They also said this is part of a series of actions it is taking to modernize the federal vehicle standards for new technologies. What are your thoughts on this NHTSA final rule?
Well, automated vehicle technology is coming. It's advancing very quickly. It is something that holds the potential to be transformative, and I think in many ways policy has not kept up. I haven't had a chance to evaluate this last step in detail, but I look forward to digging in on that and more broadly, making sure that we're acting so that on the policy side, we are ready for all of the things that automated vehicles are going to bring to our roads and to our economy.
That's great, because we all know that we need to re-examine some of our current regulatory framework, and I think that means that flexibilities in these regulations have to be exercised if we're going to continue seeing emerging technologies have government keep up with the advancement that we see in the private sector. Also last week, PHMSA announced a pilot program to study providing truck drivers with greater flexibility in split sleeper berth requirements. Various groups representing truck carriers and drivers, including the Teamsters, have indicated support for this type of flexibility in comments to the agencies. Do you know about this proposed pilot program, and what are your thoughts on that?
So I'd want to take a closer look at this and engage with the stakeholders as well to make sure I understand how this pilot program squares the goals of worker and traveler safety with the goals of flexibility.
I always think it's important when we can bring a variety of stakeholders together. Transportation infrastructure is an issue that receives strong support across this country and within the Senate as well. So it's in our interest as a government to be able to take those comments from all stakeholders in looking at any issue. When we spoke the other day, sir, I brought up an issue about truck haulers of agricultural commodities, including livestock haulers, and to be able to provide them with some flexibility in their hours of service requirements. In 2018, I offered a bipartisan amendment to provide 150 air mile radius hours of service exemption on the destination of a haul, as well as eliminating what is known as seasonality limitation of hours of service exemption. And a bill that I introduced last year, the Halls Act, addressed these issues as well. When we had our conversation, I spoke about really the challenges in moving live animals, perishable products, and it's not easy to find places to be able to unload a potload of cattle, for example, and get them off a truck, have them in some kind of facility in a pen, and then reload them. That's puts more stress on animals than is necessary, and certainly more stress than is advisable. So that is something that I hope you and I can work on together for the ag industry, the livestock industry, make sure that they have the needed flexibility in their hours of service. I hope you will commit to looking at that and working with us on that.
Thank you. That was a memorable point during our conversation that sometimes our policies can't tell the difference between live animals and other cargo, and it's one of the things I'm eager to look into and to work with you on as well.
Well, thank you. I look forward to your confirmation and appreciate again the conversations that we've had and look forward to more in the future. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Cantwell.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Schatz, remotely.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Mayor, thank you for your willingness to serve. I want to start with climate action. The President has instructed his entire cabinet to take bold climate action, not just the EPA, not just the Department of Energy, but every single executive agency. And I'd like for you to talk a little bit about what kinds of authorities you feel DOT already has and what lines of actions you can undertake right away, and how that intersects with an infrastructure package and the desire to create a better economic future over the next 6 to 12 months.
Thank you, Senators. As you correctly pointed out, the President has made it very clear that he expects all of us to work on delivering a new climate vision. And it's going to take a whole of government approach, and certainly DOT has a big part of this. You think about the role involved in fuel economy standards, vehicle electrification, what we'd have to do as a country to have the kinds of charging station infrastructure. Just represent a couple of examples of how we can be part of the solution at DOT, and I think that'll be contemplated, have to be contemplated in as a central feature of any infrastructure package. I'd welcome the opportunity to work with you on how best to do this with the most possible impact, because I also think we have a unique window of opportunity to make those kinds of investments, and we've got to use that window.
Thank you. State and local budgets have been decimated by the pandemic. Transit projects like HART, which is the Honolulu Rail Project, is no exception, and are potentially at risk without additional federal support. And just to put a fine point on it, a lot of these projects are under an FFGA, an agreement with the Federal Transit Administration that assumed a certain revenue picture pre-pandemic that is not reasonable anymore. And so my question is very simple. Do I have your commitment to work on this and other projects to make sure that all of our rail projects, whether they are pre-revenue or not, do not fall by the wayside and are able to be implemented?
Yes, we need to work together on this. I know how much these transit agencies have been through. There's obviously some support in the president's announced rescue package, but a lot more to do.
Thank you. NHTSA recently announced that even though we drove fewer miles during the pandemic, speeding, fatalities, and serious injuries have increased. What's happening and how do we solve it?
Well, over the course of my lifetime, we've made a lot of gains as a country on dealing with the effects of drunk driving on road safety and fatalities, only to see distracted driving rise to become a new and deadly effect. I believe the number stands at something on the order of 36,000 or 38,000 at last count lost in a single year to crashes on the road. We cannot accept that, and we need to move toward a vision where every trip is a safe one, whether it's long or short, on any of America's roadways.
Yeah, and I want to put a fine point on this one because, you know, the Department of Transportation, even our local transportation agencies tend to be the departments of cars. And transportation is about however you get around, whether it's on foot or via rail or bicycle or bus or whatever. And I think it's really critical that as we reauthorize the transportation bill, and as funding flows to local governments, that you lead from the top to clarify that the objective here is to get people where they need to go, not to always think in terms of widening the aperture through which the maximum number of cars can move at the maximum speed. And I'd like you to speak to that a little bit.
Yes, you know, when we were undertaking a complete streets approach in the city of South Bend, it meant a lot of us to have moral support from folks in the DOT under Secretary Fox who agreed with that vision. And I think it's very important that we recognize the importance of roadways where pedestrians, bicycles, vehicles, and any other mode can coexist peacefully. And that complete streets vision will continue to enjoy support from me if confirmed.
Just one final point about complete streets and safe routes to school and all the rest of it. I think we get a little bit caught up in the jargon. People are dying in trying to get where they need to go. And some of the vernacular here is freaking people out and causing people to move into their partisan places. And everybody's either a pedestrian or a car user or a transit user, depending on the day and depending on the circumstances. And so pitting people against each other, depending on which mode of transportation they're using, I think is the wrong approach. And I'd just like to start to change our language into being a little more plain about making sure people don't die going from where they live to where they need to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to give Senator Sullivan, who's not just stepped in the room, we're going to let Senator Markey go. Thank you. Senator Markey?
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. You will have my vote for this very important position. The fuel economy standards of our country are central to rolling back the amount of oil which we consume in our country. And we saw last year an actual reduction in fuel economy standards, even though there had been a law promulgated by President Obama, working with the Department of Transportation and the EPA to dramatically increase those fuel economy standards up to 54 miles per gallon by the year 2025. And we know that 70% of oil goes into transportation in our society. So my question to you is, in terms of the increase in fuel economy standards, it's a joint responsibility with the EPA. The DOT has authority under NHTSA and a 2007 law, which I was the principal House author of, which Donald Trump, which Barack Obama used to increase those fuel economy standards. Could you give us an outline of how ambitious you're planning on being in terms of increasing fuel economy standards, and then linking that to a plan to have a mass deployment of electric vehicles in our country?
Thank you, Senator. As you point out, the transportation sector is now the biggest contributor of U.S. sectors to greenhouse gases. And when it comes to fuel economy and when it comes to improving the climate profile of transportation, I believe we need to be moving forward and not back. This is not only imperative in order for us to meet our climate goals and prevent the destruction of property and life, but it's also very important for industry to have that kind of certainty and clarity. American companies, American workers should be leading the way in producing, for example, electric vehicles and the most efficient vehicles on the road. And we need to do everything we can to support that as part of a partnership with other agencies in the administration. As you point out, EV charging stations are a big part of how we can do that, and the president has spoken to a goal of deploying 500,000 electric charging stations across the country. That's a major lift, but one I believe we can meet.
Yeah, thank you. And again, fuel economy standards went down last year after going up for 5 consecutive years. So it's a very critical area for us to be able to deal with. It's not a technology issue. It's just a matter of political will to be able to get that job done. The issue of the accountability of greenhouse gases in any infrastructure project is going to be important. I've introduced the Green Streets Act that would require that kind of accounting. Could you talk a little bit about what your plan is to link greenhouse gas reductions to any new infrastructure projects in our country?
Well, so much depends on making sure when we talk about costs and benefits that we're truly accounting for those not only environmental benefits, but the cost of business as usual. So I'd look forward to learning more about the work that you've cited, and think it's going to be very important to factor that in anytime we're evaluating projects and opportunities going forward.
Thank you. And I know the administration has announced a new mask initiative for planes, for trains, for public transportation. We need to protect passengers, flight attendants, anyone that is a part of these industries. Can you speak to that issue of the need to absolutely have more protections that are put in place, and perhaps convening a joint task force of aviation security and public health experts to develop across the board policies to provide that protection during the pandemic?
Yes, we are prepared to make sure that we use all relevant authorities to enforce the president's executive order to ensure that across every mode of transportation, workers, passengers, commuters are protected. And I also want to say that I welcome your push to make sure that we're thinking across different sectors, departments with that whole of government approach. Often these things are siloed, but obviously in order to deal with a challenge this big, we need to be partnering across every division of authority in government to make sure everybody in their lane is doing their part.
Yeah, I also would love to work with you on this rollback of government authority to protect against unfair and deceptive practices in the consumer sector, raising prices for air passengers, for example, just tipping them upside down at the counter. We need to definitely take more action in that area, and love to work with you on that issue. And also up on Cape Cod, we have the Bourne and Sagamore bridges. Their life expectancy has come to a conclusion, and we're going to need help in not repairing them, but replacing them in the future. So I would love to invite you, Mr. Secretary, to come up to Cape Cod so we can give you a tour of the Bourne and Sagamore bridges and maybe help to create a plan for us to be able to replace them before their usefulness has been completely exhausted.
Well, I'd look forward to that visit and would welcome the opportunity.
Thank you. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Mayor, good to see you again. Thanks for our meeting yesterday. I appreciated the discussion. You know, I'm a big fan of the building trades, men and women who build infrastructure. They're going to be an important component of the constituency for the Department of Transportation if you're confirmed. And you will be also in charge of PHMSA with regard to pipelines. You may have seen Mark McManus, who is the General President of the United Association of Union Plumbers and Pipe Fitters, put out a statement yesterday about the President's decision on Keystone. He said, quote, "When built with union labor, men and women of the United Association, the building trades, with pipelines like Keystone, remain the safest and most efficient modes of energy transportation in the world." That's PHMSA's mission. Sadly, the Biden administration has now put thousands of union workers out of work on day one. How do you respond to the men and women in the building trades? Again, I'm huge fans of them. They built this country. To comments like that, day one, the president makes an announcement that put thousands of union workers out of work.
Well, like you, I'm a big fan of the building trades. I take pride in the fact that my very first campaign was run out of the basement of the Building Trades Hall in my hometown of South Bend. The president, of course, has kept the promise that he made to voters when it's come to climate. I believe he will also
But do you think that decision is going to impact climate at all, to kill the Keystone Pipeline and kill thousands of jobs?
So I believe that the president's climate vision will create more jobs on net. And I think it's going to be very important to work with him and work with Congress to make sure that we can deliver on that promise too, that on net, more good-paying union jobs will be created in the context of the climate and infrastructure work that we have before us than has been impacted by other decisions.
So as we discussed yesterday, I appreciate your comments on this issue of transportation equity. It's a phrase I hadn't really heard before, but I think it actually fits my state quite well. As you and I talked about, Alaska has 10,000 miles of roads. Indiana has 80,000, and yet we're 17 times bigger than Indiana. So I think there's a little transportation inequity going on there. So can I get your commitment to come up to my state, if you're confirmed, to see these real challenges? As we talked about yesterday, every state's unique, but my state, particularly on infrastructure issues, is really unique. We're, I like to say, resource rich, infrastructure poor. Can I get your commitment?
You have it, and I'm looking forward to the visit.
Good. As I mentioned yesterday, Mr. Mayor, 82% of the communities in my state are not connected by roads. So that's pretty darn unique. No one else in America has communities like that. You already heard here the essential air service, as we talked about, in Alaska is really essential. Some people go after this program because maybe you don't need it in Plymouth or South Bend because you have a road connecting there. But in my communities, most of the time, you don't have any roads. So essential air service is very essential. Can I get your commitment to have the Department of Transportation in its budget fully fund the EAS, especially for communities that really need it, the communities that don't have roads that connect to it?
I'll certainly commit to working with you on that, and I took the point as you educated me on this that EAS is important to a lot of communities, but there's a distinction for those that literally have no other connection.
Thank you. And similarly, we talked about commitments with airport infrastructure. And again, I think we all know that's important in every community. In my communities, there's a disparity. Again, transportation equity. I would call it transportation inequity, where in Alaska, where airports are so important for these small communities because there's no roads, we often have infrastructure that in the lower 48, nobody, mayors in particular, would accept. Can you work with me and the FAA administrator to make sure upgrades come to my state's airports? Because this isn't just efficiency, as you mentioned, the most important part of your job is going to be safety. And unfortunately, in Alaska, we have a very high accident and even death rate with regard to air travel relative to the lower 48. Can I get your commitment, if confirmed, Mr. Mayor, on that one too?
Yes, look forward to working with you on that.
Okay, and then finally, we talked about this. I think as a mayor, you're going to have some good insights, but this really, really important issue of permitting reform. At the federal government level, for whatever reason, we have this permitting delays, whether it's on highways, whether it's on bridges. I think it takes, on average, 8 years to permit a bridge in America. 8 years. We had a gold mine, like I said, in Alaska. You're not in charge of gold mines. 20 years to permit a gold mine that pays 400 people very good wages. What are your thoughts on permitting reform? Nobody wants to cut corners on safety and the environment, but 8 years to permit a bridge. We had a hearing, the chairwoman probably remembers it, the SeaTac Airport, when it built its new runway, 15 years to permit that new runway before they even started. What are your thoughts on how we get to more efficient, timely permitting that everybody in America wants, with the exception of a few fringe groups?
Well, as you correctly said, as mayor, I've encountered the ways in which these requirements can lengthen or complicate projects. And I think the key to approaching it, as you say, is that there can't be any cutting of corners around safety or environmental goals, the fundamental reasons why rules exist. But anytime there's an opportunity to meet those same goals in a more streamlined fashion, when there are duplicated steps or anything else that can be improved, I'd welcome an opportunity to work on that.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Mayor Buttigieg, good to see you here, and thank you for your willingness to serve in this capacity. And I'm particularly pleased to see Justin here with you as well, a partner. And I'll say, among all of your great accomplishments, Justin, I appreciate you're a Michigander. Raised in the Traverse City area, worked in the cherry groves of Traverse City, and I know, Mayor, that's a special place for you, too. So it's great to have both of you here before us. And as both of you know, because you know the state so well, Michigan is the home of the auto industry, critically important to us as well as the whole country. And you have publicly stated, and I want to quote your statement, automated vehicles can make transportation safer, cleaner, more accessible, and more efficient while creating thousands of good jobs. And I certainly could not agree more with that statement. So my question to you, Mr. Buttigieg, is if confirmed as Secretary, will you commit to working with this committee and with me and Senator Thune and others and soon-to-be Chair Cantwell, who has been working with me on this, to help inform our legislation, providing for safe testing as well as for the deployment of highly automated vehicles?
Absolutely. I'm enthusiastic about the opportunity and for America to lead the way.
Great. Excellent. Excellent. The other area that's important to the auto industry is electric vehicles. And to me, it's certainly a win-win proposition for the United States automotive industry, to consumers, and the environment. And as you know, more and more automakers are increasing the number of EVs that they're producing. And in fact, out of our Detroit automakers, a whole long line of very exciting EVs are coming to the market currently and into the future. President Biden has rightfully prioritized electrification within the transportation sector and the federal fleet as part of his climate platform, which you mentioned here earlier, and that's certainly an important priority for me as well. If confirmed, what steps will you take to advance electrification of the fleet, including potentially plans to expand infrastructure along our interstate highways?
Well, I think to your point, the infrastructure is key. Industry is increasingly bringing EVs to the point where they pencil out or represent a cost savings to a consumer. And the more that's the case, the more the real hesitation to acquiring one will be range anxiety, worrying about whether you can get to where you're going without having to stop and charge. That's why the president's commitment to 500,000 charging stations is so important, and I'm looking forward to working with you to try to deliver on that commitment.
Excellent. During our meeting last week, when we did a real deep dive into a lot of these issues, we discussed the importance of PHMSA. You've had some questions related to that already during the hearing, and how important PHMSA's work is to keep our network of pipeline infrastructure safe and as secure as possible. This has been an extremely important issue for me, and it's been an important issue for all Michiganders, given the fact that we have an aging oil pipeline, Line 5, that runs through Michigan and across the Straits of Mackinac, which, as you are well aware, but for folks watching, it's the straits between the Lower Peninsula and the Upper Peninsula, an old 60-year-old plus pipeline that if there is a pipeline break there, be absolutely catastrophic to this large body of fresh water that provides drinking water for 40 million people. So having an oil pipeline break there is catastrophic for a variety of reasons, significant reasons. May I have your commitment that if confirmed, that you'll continue a very close collaboration I've been able to have with PHMSA as relates to Line 5 and the federal government, particularly until we get a final determination. Right now, there's talk between the state and the pipeline company and federal, but we need to have a very close cooperative relationship with PHMSA, and I hope you would make that a priority if confirmed.
Yes, I'm committed to that cooperation, and I know how important it is.
Right. And the other issue related to PHMSA is will you ensure that the agency has the adequate resources needed to recruit and retain personnel? That's a challenge across the federal enterprise, but certainly an issue with PHMSA that we need to address, and would certainly welcome the opportunity to work with you if confirmed.
I would too.
Great. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I yield.
Thank you, Senator Peters, and we definitely want to work with you on the electric vehicle legislation, and certainly appreciate your leadership on that and understand how important it is on so many fronts. So thank you for everything you've been doing to advance that legislation. I know you've been working with Senator Thune for some time on that, so look forward to working with you. Next on the list is Senator Blackburn, if now is a good...
Yes,
okay,
thank you. We were over in Sask, just across the hall, but trying to move forward with General Austin. So apologize, but thank you for your time today, and have been able to monitor remotely the hearing and listen to some of your responses to questions, and thank you also for your time prior to this to talk through some of the things. So let's pick up where we left off yesterday, talking about your work as a mayor and looking through some of the appointees. I think you're the only mayor that would be, or previous mayor that would be, in the president's cabinet.
Myself and Mayor Walsh of Boston for later.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for that correction. But as we said yesterday, you understand how red tape is very expensive for local governments. And as I told you, with Tennesseans and my Tennessee county mayors and city mayors, it is the red tape that many times causes them to set aside a transportation project simply because NEPA studies, time, expense, and it makes transportation less efficient because of some of these regulations and the red tape that is attached to that. So I would hope that, and I would like for you to talk about what you would bring to the table to help the Department of Transportation be more efficient and less cumbersome when it comes to federal regulations, the impact and the cost.
Well, thank you, Senator, for the question, and it does rhyme with my experience as a mayor, eager to get things done and encountering a lot of regulatory complexity. And so I think the approach to that begins with listening, speaking actively with those local leaders, state, local, tribal, and territorial leaders trying to get things done, as well as an open door to you and other congressional colleagues who can really flag some of these issues. And anytime there's an opportunity to be more user-friendly or more streamlined, without compromising, of course, on the safety, environmental, or other goals that are at stake, I'd welcome ways to do that.
I think it is important that we put a focus on doing that. Also, I know you've talked some about EV production. Just to highlight with you that the state of Tennessee has a lead in some of this production with some of our auto manufacturers. So we are going to be watching carefully as you and the Department of Transportation make any moves that are going to deal with the EVs and their production models. One other thing that I want to highlight with you and see if you have any further additional information. We talked about the $2 billion in the CARES Act that is there for motor coaches, buses, flagged vessels, and the need for Treasury to move forward on the rules and also dispensing those dollars. Would you like to make some comments there?
Yes, as you pointed out, these are dollars that many, including in your state, are relying on, and I'm looking into what steps might need to be taken, partnering with Treasury to make sure that they get out the door efficiently.
Well, we need action on this item. The motor coach industry, as we discussed yesterday, they are functioning at less than 10% of the capacity for where they were in 2019. This is truly a dire situation. As we mentioned yesterday, they were the first to be shut down. They are going to be among the last to open back up. And this has happened to them through no fault of their own. And it is going to be imperative that there be a response to them sooner rather than later.
Understood.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I think next is Senator Baldwin remotely.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to Mayor Buttigieg, congratulations on your nomination. Welcome to the Commerce, Science, Transportation Committee.
Thank you.
And I can't let Senator Peters be alone in connecting with our states. Not only is Chasten a native Michigander, but attended the University of Wisconsin at Eau Claire. And so we welcome this sort of upper Midwestern tradition. I wanted to just start by noting that our states share a deep tradition and history of manufacturing. And I have always believed that when we're expending taxpayer dollars, we ought to be supporting American workers, American products, and American ingenuity and research and development. And obviously, the Department of Transportation plays an enormous role in furthering those opportunities. I know that my colleagues and I on the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee are so eager to work on infrastructure and really believe that we must seize the opportunity to build modern, sustainable infrastructure while supporting American workers. So let me begin with a couple of brief yes or no questions. Will you commit to including Buy America requirements in any Biden administration infrastructure proposal to ensure that federal funding supports products that are made in America?
Yes, I strongly support you, or I join you in strongly supporting Buy America.
Okay, and will you commit to supporting legislation that would close existing gaps and loopholes in law that allow taxpayer funds to purchase products not made in America?
I would look forward to working with you on that. I know that there are a lot of questions about some of these exceptions that have emerged.
Yes, let me provide one example. I am the co-author of bipartisan legislation that prevents the Federal Transit Administration grants from going to Chinese state-owned or subsidized companies. In the last administration, contrary to congressional intent, they provided a permanent exemption to transit agencies currently working with these Chinese state-subsidized or state-owned companies. Will you commit to honor the congressional intent and remove permanent exemptions provided to Chinese companies by the Trump Federal Transit Administration?
So this is something I'll look into right away because I know it's very important to meet the congressional intent.
Well, I appreciate that. As Transportation Secretary, you will be charged with enforcing the existing Buy America rules and laws. Back in 1978, Congress passed legislation requiring all manufactured products to be subject to Buy America rules. Since 1978, the Department of Transportation has provided blanket waivers for the purchase of manufactured products made outside of the United States. I'm wondering if you will commit to removing this waiver or restricting it in order to require certain frequently purchased products be made in America. For example, traffic lights, highway signs, and traffic cones, to name just a few.
So the goal is to make sure as much as possible of this is made in America, and if confirmed, I do commit to looking at what we can do to adjust or change or perhaps rescind that provision.
Well, thank you very much. That concludes my questions, but I am very much looking forward to working with you during your tenure as Secretary of Transportation.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Baldwin. Senator Scott is next, I believe.
First off, thanks, Mayor. Thanks for your service as mayor, and thanks for willingness to serve. And we had a good conversation the other day. So thanks for being as direct as you could. First, as you know, the Highway Trust Fund doesn't have enough funding or it's going insolvent. Would you support gas tax increases? And if so, how much?
So I think all options need to be on the table. As you know, the gas tax has not been increased since 1993, and it's never been pegged to inflation. And that's one of the reasons why the current state of the Highway Trust Fund is that there's more going out than coming in. Up until now, that's been addressed with general funding transfers. I don't know whether Congress would want to continue doing that. And I think in the near term, we need a solution that can provide some predictability and sustainability. In the long term, we need to bear in mind also that as vehicles become more efficient and as we pursue electrification, sooner or later, there will be questions about whether the gas tax can be effective at all.
So have you looked at, all options being on the table? What would you propose to pay for it?
Well, there are several different models. Again, in the short to medium term, that could include revisiting the gas tax, adjusting it, and or connecting it to inflation. Right now, it's also assessed, as you know, in a dollars and cents level, not on a percentage basis. Of course, the way we've been filling the gaps so far has been general fund transfers. That could continue if there's appetite for it. A lot has been suggested recently about the idea of vehicle miles traveled base. So if we're committed to the idea of user pays, then part of how you might do that would be based on vehicle miles traveled. But that raises, of course, concerns about privacy, and there remains some technological questions too. These are examples of some of the things that could be part of the solution, but I know that that's going to have to be a conversation, not only in the administration, but with Congress too.
So I've been up here a couple of years. I just finished 8 years as governor, and we were able to invest quite a bit of money in the environment, but only because we dramatically grew our economy. Because without a good economy, there's no money in the budget to do that. You've in the past supported the Green New Deal. What would you be interested in impact our businesses and our families?
So the president's been clear about the importance of dealing with climate change and ensuring that we do our part to prevent the destruction of property and the destruction of life. And this is our chance. I believe if we get this right, this will also be something that enhances economic opportunity. Electric vehicles, seeing America become a lead or continue to be a leader and generate the kind of economic opportunity for American workers that's involved in that expanding market. Whether we're talking about charging infrastructure, support for that emerging industry, or other modes of transportation that are becoming greener or at least ought to become greener. That's my idea of a green deal that everybody could get behind, because it will leave us economically better off, as well as meeting the climate crisis before it's too late.
There was one study that said the Green New Deal will cost, almost $100 trillion. So how, what impact, if we did something like that, what impact would that have on our economy and jobs and all of our businesses that are competing globally?
So are you referring to the president's climate proposal, or?
No, the one that was proposed and everybody talked about during the presidential race.
Okay, so I proposed one. I'm not sure that it was scored in that way. Of course, the president won our primary and the election, and that'll be the vision that goes forward. And ultimately, we cannot afford not to act on climate, as you know. And the question becomes, how can we do that in a way that creates economic benefit in the near term, as well as preventing catastrophe in the long term?
Sure. The president's proposed taking some money out of FEMA that's normally used for disasters, such as in my state, hurricanes, or in your state would be flooding possibly, and maybe even wildfires. We have some in Florida. And it's talked about taking $2 billion and giving it to New York and to New York City to deal with their budgets as a result of COVID. I've had a concern about that. It's supposed to be used for disasters. Do you see any way that DOT would be doing the same sort of thing? Would you take some of your budget to help a particular state over their budget issues rather than for the purpose that the money was allocated for?
Well, certainly we need to make sure that anything is spent in a way that meets congressional intent. I do think that part of the concept of rescue is sometimes to intervene when there's a danger of anything from a transit agency not being able to maintain service to some other kind of impact on critical services or state and local government. But I do think that has to be done in a way that's consistent with the specific intent that funding was laid aside for.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Chair, as well. Secretary-designate Buttigieg, I want to congratulate you, your husband, Chasten, and the rest of your family on this historic nomination. I believe that your appointment is precisely what President Biden had in mind when he expressed a desire to serve as a bridge to the next generation of leaders. You served our nation in uniform, you've led your local community, and now you've been called on to help lead the Biden administration's effort to rebuild our country's roads, bridges, transit systems, rail, airports, and waterways, all of which combined have been rated by the American Association of Civil Engineers at a D- grade. Since I have about 5 hours worth of material that I'd love to discuss, but only 5 minutes, I'm going to devote my questions to addressing two vital priorities that should serve as the North Stars for your department. First, local job creation, and second, achieving infrastructure for all. One of my top priorities is making sure that infrastructure investment drives local job creation. I think this is especially relevant because this is an area where the department doesn't need to wait on Congress to act. Under your potential leadership, the department could take action to propose a new rule that strengthens local economies in Illinois and throughout the country. Furthermore, enhancing local hire efforts should attract bipartisan support, since solving the problem requires eliminating or dramatically overhauling a 34-year-old regulation that is bureaucratic, antiquated, and worst of all, harmful to local job creation. Based on my own experience, repealing an ineffective one-size-fits-all regulation may be one of the most productive first steps for a new administration. The very first bill I succeeded in getting signed into law as a senator was a straightforward repeal of a regulation that was well-intentioned, but ultimately unworkable for local metropolitan planning organizations. Mr. Mayor, I would be happy to work with you on a similar effort. We should empower local mayors, city councils, indeed any recipient of federal funds to implement job creation programs that promote hiring local residents to get to work rebuilding the very communities they live in. Mayor Buttigieg, will you work with me to eliminate this anti-growth regulation and replace it with a modern rule that actively encourages infrastructure projects to hire local workers?
Thank you, Senator. I look forward to working with you on this. We need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support local economic growth, and I recognize that it's been a long time since those local hire provisions were written, and there's an opportunity to bring them up to speed.
Thank you. Now I want to turn to another issue of critical importance, making sure that transportation systems funded by all Americans are actually capable of serving all Americans. You know I'm not one to mince words, so I'll just be frank. The transportation community has failed the disability community over and over again. From Amtrak squandering the incredibly generous implementation timeline under the Americans with Disabilities Act, to airlines making travel more difficult for people who require service animals, to transit systems often failing to keep elevators working, the disability community has been left stranded far too often and for far too long. For example, your very predecessor made clear where she stood on disability rights when one of her first actions as secretary was eliminating a consumer protection rule that simply provided the flying public with transparency on each carrier's record in transporting and damaging wheelchairs. While we were able to undo this damage with a legislative fix, I remain deeply frustrated that an act of Congress was even required to do so. Many rightfully view the callous way that carriers handle wheelchairs, along with the hands-off approach adopted by regulators, as a prime example of the harmful ableist attitudes that are far too pervasive in our society, including in the transportation sector. First, will you work with my office to help refine and improve my forthcoming All Stations Accessibility Program Act, which would establish a competitive grant program to help outdated transportation facilities and rolling stock comply with the ADA?
Yes, I'm eager to work with you on this. It's so important that our transit and transportation resources are accessible.
Thank you. And then second, I strongly urge you to expand your senior leadership team to include a dedicated advisor with experience and expertise on accessibility and universal design.
I'd be very open to that.
Will you do that? Thank you. You know, accessibility must be considered at the forefront of all policy development, rather than treated like an afterthought or a box-checking exercise. We really need strong leadership from you and others in administration. My own home state of Illinois in Chicago, our mass transit system, the L, is projected to be fully wheelchair accessible in 20 years, which would make it a half century since the passage of the ADA. And I'm sure that is the case all over the country. We can't let that be the standard. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much, Senator Duckworth. Senator Lee.
Thank you very much for being here, Mr. Buttigieg. It's a pleasure to have you. And I wanted to follow up. I want to start by following up on some questions that were asked to you by Senator Scott. Would you agree with me if I said that we've sort of overextended ourselves with regard to the Highway Trust Fund? In other words, when we created the Highway Trust Fund, the whole idea is we would impose this gasoline tax in order to create an interstate highway system. Over time, we were going to hand that system over to the states to maintain, and then we'd step back and eventually get rid of it. We haven't done it that way. We've used it to maintain the federal highway system, which is understandable, but then we've added to the list of things that we fund using the Highway Trust Fund. And we've had to dip over and over again into the general fund in order to meet our basic needs. So I believe when Senator Scott raised a similar question, your response was you'd consider anything on the table. All options should be on the table. Is that right?
Yes, I think there's a recognition that we don't have adequate national resources going into roads and highways, and that we need to look at any responsible, viable revenue mechanism we can all agree on to do something about that.
So could that include possibly increasing the gasoline tax?
Well, it's possible. Certainly many states have taken that step, including my own, but it's not the only approach.
Right. I have worried, my own state has a progressive tax, one that disproportionately affects poor Americans. Would you agree with that?
Certainly one of the concerns about the gas tax is it's likely not as progressive as federal income tax, for example.
Right. Not just not as progressive, but it does have a regressive impact. So in light of that, it's my view that we ought to be looking at a lot of other options before or instead of getting to that one. What about cost savings measures? Are there things you'd be willing to consider on that front?
Well, certainly something I want to look into right away if confirmed. Any government enterprise needs to run as efficiently as possible. These are taxpayer dollars, and we've got to make sure that we are streamlined in delivering as much as possible toward the actual intent. It was a focus of mine when I was mayor to make sure that we didn't have any duplicative or outdated things that were adding to the cost of delivery, and that's certainly something I want to look into here as well.
Is it also possible that some of the funding that we provide for the states for their transportation infrastructure projects could be made more efficient and more effective by reducing some of the regulatory burden that goes with them? I've heard from some state transportation officials that 20 to 30%, in some cases they insist it's more than that, of a particular project can be attributed to compliance with the federal regulations that go with the receipt of federal money. Is that something we ought to look at?
Certainly want to take a look at this. Again, as mayor, I saw how rules and regulations can add to the time or expense of a project. Of course, those rules are there for a reason, but if we can meet that same reason with less of a burden, we should look at how to do it.
I'd also like to talk to you about drones for a minute. Drones are becoming a very new tool and a significant driving force in our economy. Drone technology has the ability to improve the lives of every American in one way or another. There are many who are concerned about the impact that a regulatory system could have on them one way or another. There are some within the federal government who have wanted the federal government to be the actor, the enforcer, essentially the exclusive regulatory body, treating them much the same way that we treat airlines, for instance. And yet I think it's important that we look at key differences between drones and airliners. Drones in many instances are operating just feet, sometimes inches above the ground. They're much more intrusive. They have a much more direct impact on property rights because instead of dealing with tens of thousands of feet in their normal operating elevation, we're talking about feet or inches at most, a couple hundred feet. It's my view that we need to leave room for state interests. It's states that determine nuisance law. It's states that determine property rights and where someone's property rights end and begin and how they're impacted by nuisance law and things like that. Would you agree that the states have an important, prominent role to play, one that we need to make sure isn't completely preempted by the federal authority that might exist here?
I think you raise a really important point. I think up until now, most of the regulatory concern has been on the FAA side, just thinking about the fact that drones enter the national airspace. But the smaller it is and the nearer it is to the Earth, the less it has in common with those aircraft. And I recognize that kind of safety framework for the national airspace isn't really relevant to the question of maybe a drone going a few feet up, being over a neighbor's fence, which might very well call for some kind of response, but not necessarily a federal aviation safety response.
Thank you, Senator Lee.
Thank you.
Senator Tester, do you have any questions at all?
I do, Mr. Chairman, and I want to tell you that this is my first committee back since the pandemic. I've been in some executive sessions. It's the first one back, and I just want to say thank you to the staff. I mean, this is a hell of an operation, and I just want to thank you, the ranking member, and the staff for being able to pull this off. And welcome, Mayor Pete. Your intellect has preceded you into the room, and I'm going to tell you that I have been able to watch nearly every question and watch your answers. You have put on a clinic on how a nominee should work and act. You haven't avoided the questions. You've been straightforward, and you know what the hell you're talking about. And that's really pretty damn refreshing. And I just want to thank you for being here. As we talked, and thank you for the virtual meeting we had a few days ago, but as we talked, infrastructure in rural America is as important as it is anywhere in the country. And making sure that rural America has access to the dollars, even though we don't have as many people per square mile, is critically important. And let me give you an example. There's a little highway that runs south of my farm. It's about 20 miles long. It was built when I was in grade school and then extended out when I was in high school. That little highway saves every farmer that lives out in my community literally hundreds, if not thousands of dollars every year. Why? Less flat tires, front ends aren't knocked out of a line, less wear and tear on vehicles, so you can run them longer. That is why we need to make sure rural America is taken care of. I don't pay enough gas tax to fund a project that would put that highway in. But the truth is, all working together as Americans with the gas tax fund, we've done it. I appreciate your answers on the Highway Trust Fund. I do think we need to look at different ways to do it, to fund it. I don't think what we've got now, I don't think anybody on this committee thinks it's sustainable or not. It's not. And so we've got to figure out how to do it because infrastructure is important. And as I've said before, we're living off of the infrastructure investment of my parents and grandparents. And quite frankly, that's unacceptable. We owe more to our kids than that. And we shouldn't be doing it on borrowed money. We should be doing it. We should be paying for it. And so I want to thank you for your answers on those things. I do want to talk about something that has been brought up before by different questioners, and that is the one size fits all on regulations. It is really important that you take into account flexibility. I've delayed electronic logging devices for livestock haulers because I think those regs will put people out of business, and quite frankly, not only in the trucking business, but in agriculture. And people have to understand that if you've got a potload of cattle or hogs, you just can't pull over on the side of the road, because if you do, it's going to overheat, they're going to die. They have to have that air going through that pot. And as Senator Fisher said, if you unload them, if you've ever loaded cattle or hogs, it's tough enough to do the first time. You try to do it the second time, and I don't want to be around, I'll just tell you, because it's a hell of a job. And so make sure there's that flexibility there. And as Senator Blunt brought up, the importance of a patchwork approach to trucking regulations, specifically with the California meal and rest break issue, I just want to echo what Senator Blunt said on that. And then to get back to where Senator Thune was on rural America and tribal areas, if you're confirmed, how will you prioritize that?
Well, I think it's very important that rural and tribal communities have every opportunity to benefit from what I expect will be increased infrastructure investment, we hope, partnering with Congress in the coming year. So how do we do that? We make sure there are criteria that are fair, that give every kind of community a fair shake, especially when we're talking about these kinds of discretionary programs. Secondly, I think we need to communicate very clearly how to engage and make that process as simple as possible, recognizing that the smaller a community is, the less you can assume that they'll have a lot of personnel on this. Third, I believe there are cases where technical assistance would be justified as well to help ease that process along for communities that might not have those resources.
Thank you. I want to talk about air travel for just a second because it is critically important when it comes to economic development. If you come from a state like Montana, there's not a lot of competition. And now, since COVID-19's come down the pipe, we don't have a lot of flights either, and rightfully so. I'm not being critical. If the flights are empty, it's pretty tough to maintain them, although we've helped the airlines significantly in Congress. But my question revolves around once things get back to normal, and assuming those flights come back, competition isn't, we've got a couple airlines, truthfully, and some of the airports have 3 airlines, but yeah, 3, maybe 4, okay? But it's not a competitive marketplace because we're a rural state. And so is there anything you think you could do as Secretary of Transportation to encourage more competition in the airline industry overall?
Well, I know that there are responsibilities and authorities pertaining to the competitiveness of the airline industry, and I'm looking forward to getting a better understanding about how to mobilize them in this way, because I do think it's very important that communities of every size have that kind of competition and support. I can tell you when we were able to see another major carrier added to South Bend International Airport, which is small but mighty, made a big difference across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just close with this. Thank you for being here. Thanks for putting your name in the hopper to be Secretary of Transportation. And for all the other nominees that are out there, you need to look at what's happened in the last 2 hours you've done a nice job answering the questions, and I thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Senator Tester. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Buttigieg, congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
The Department of Transportation has responsibility for infrastructure, has a major role concerning jobs, and has responsibility for ensuring safety. I am hopeful that if you're confirmed your tenure, we will see material advances on all three. I will say it was disconcerting to see yesterday, the first day of the Biden administration, straight out of the gate, President Biden announced that he was canceling the Keystone pipeline. That is a major infrastructure project. That is a project that right now today has 1,200 good-paying union jobs. And in 2021, the Keystone pipeline was scheduled to have more than 11,000 jobs, including 8,000 union jobs, for contracts worth $1.6 billion. And with the stroke of a pen, President Biden has told those 11,000 workers, those union workers, your jobs are gone. Mr. Buttigieg, what do you say to those workers whose jobs have just been eliminated by presidential edict?
Well, I think the most important thing is to make sure that we make good on the promise of the president's climate vision as being one that, on net, creates far more jobs, millions, we hope. I know that won't just happen. We'll have to do a lot of work to make sure that's real. But getting this right means ensuring that there are more good-paying union jobs for all Americans delivered through that infrastructure vision.
So for those workers, the answer is somebody else will get a job?
The answer is that we are very eager to see those workers continue to be employed in good-paying union jobs, even if they might be different ones.
Well, I fear that decision is the front end of a whole series of regulatory decisions, one after the other, that will be eliminating union jobs, that will be eliminating manufacturing jobs, that will be eliminating energy jobs. And that is altogether out of step with what the American people want. There is also some rich irony in the long history of the Democratic Party. There was a time when the Democratic Party, under presidents like FDR, was considered the party of union workers, of blue-collar workers. And decisions like yesterday, and I fear more decisions that we will see in the days and weeks to come, are demonstrating more and more that today's Democratic Party is not concerned with working men and women having jobs, and that the answer is we'll eliminate your jobs, and I guess good luck in the future.
Well, again, Senator, I think the answer is that we're going to create more good-paying union jobs, and we can do that while recognizing the fact that when the books are written about our careers, one of the main things we'll be judged on is whether we did enough to stop the destruction of life and property due to climate change. I've got to believe we can do both of those things. But if you and I can make common cause in our support for labor, then I think that's great news.
All right. Well, when it comes to addressing climate change, in the last year, the United States was the #1 nation on the face of the planet for reduction of carbon emissions. The major driver of that has been the shift from coal-fired electricity production to natural gas. And the gas renaissance we're seeing in this country is producing enormous environmental benefits. Now, this past June, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration finalized a rule authorizing the bulk transportation of liquefied natural gas by rail. LNG by rail gives Americans, particularly those who are limited with energy choices because of geography, gives them an affordable option for electricity. What are your views on the rule that was finalized allowing the transportation of LNG by rail?
So that's something I want to take a closer look at if confirmed. I believe it's very important that we take account of the safety considerations that are at stake. I do recognize that natural gas, certainly for climate purposes, is not the same thing as coal. In our own city, in our own municipal fleet, we did a lot of work on things from garbage trucks to light-duty vehicles to have some of them run on gas. And I think there was federal support to do that on our bus system as well. It's not the same as coal, but of course it's also not the same as hydroelectric power. And we need to be balancing all of these considerations as we go forward.
So you're saying, if confirmed, you would consider repealing that rule and stopping the transportation of LNG by rail?
The best honest answer I can give you now is that I'll be taking a hard look at it.
Well, that's disconcerting as well. Let's shift to a different topic as my final question. As you know, roughly 3/4 of DOT's budget is mandatory budget authority, derived from the Highway Trust Fund. Based on 2020 apportionment, only 3 states in the country, Texas, Colorado, and South Carolina, remain donor states, meaning they contribute more than they receive back. In the apportionment, the state of Texas contributed $212 million more to the Highway Trust Fund than the state's roads received. Senator from your state, Senator Donnelly, had introduced legislation that would adjust that formula so that states would not be losers, would not be donor states. Are you supportive of reassessing that formula?
Well, I'll make sure to call Senator Donnelly, he's a good friend, and learn more about that action, and we'll take a look at that as well if confirmed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Senator Sinema.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Mr. Buttigieg joining us today. Arizona is one of the fastest growing states in the nation, and my state's steady increase in population, jobs, and opportunities puts additional stress on our transportation infrastructure, including our highways, bridges, airports, trains, and buses. We need to work cooperatively to develop transportation options that work for all Arizona communities, from our largest cities to our rural and tribal areas. And now is the time to develop bipartisan solutions to invest in Arizona and build the infrastructure we need to continue to grow and succeed. If you are confirmed for this important role, I look forward to working with you to improve and expand the transportation infrastructure in Arizona, create good paying jobs, and utilize new technologies to lay the foundation for sustainable growth in all parts of my state. Now, my top priority for the last year has been working with local, state, and federal partners to keep Arizonans healthy and safe from the pandemic. As the ranking member on the aviation subcommittee and someone who has to fly regularly, I called on the previous administration to do more to improve COVID safety throughout the transportation system, including on airlines and in airports. Yesterday, the president issued a mask mandate and called for Americans to help prevent transmission of the virus. What are your plans to address COVID transportation safety, if confirmed?
Well, I think that step one is to make sure that we are effectively carrying out the president's directive, and that means using all of the available authorities to implement those mask mandates on, especially when it comes to aviation and interstate travel. Where direct authorities don't exist, we'll want to make sure that we're supporting, for example, local transit agencies and those organizations that have sometimes been left to develop their own protocols, and support them as well in implementing mask mandates and anything needed in order to prevent the spread of the disease.
Well, thank you. As you know, Arizona needs additional transportation infrastructure to support the growth throughout our state. One major project for Arizona is Interstate 11, which will run from the Mexican border to Phoenix through Las Vegas to northern Nevada. It will be an important link between 2 of the largest cities in the country. It'll increase regional trade and commerce with Mexico and Canada, and it will relieve congestion and air pollution in downtown Phoenix. So I'm asking for your commitment to learn about this important project for the Southwest and work with me to advance the I-11 if confirmed.
I do look forward to learning more about the I-11 project, and have heard from you and others in your region about how important this is economically and for the future of your states.
I appreciate that. You know, the Phoenix metro's area's continued economic and population growth means that the region's public transit system must grow as well. We're the 5th largest city in the country, but our public transportation infrastructure lags behind many similarly sized cities. Last year, Valley Metro's light rail received a Federal Transit Administration grant to build out the South Central extension, which will allow many lower income Arizonans to more easily travel downtown, to Arizona State University, and to Sky Harbor Airport. There's another Valley Metro light rail project under review at the department, which is the Northwest Extension Phase 2. It's a project that will extend public transit to growing neighborhoods northwest of downtown. So I ask again for your commitment to learn about this project and work with me to advance transit projects across the state that will allow for Arizona's sustainable growth.
Absolutely. I look forward to it.
Thanks. In the short time we have remaining, I want to talk about the 22 Native American tribes in Arizona. Each of our tribes has very specific and unique transportation needs. And I want to highlight the Tribal Transportation Program. It's part of the Federal Highway Administration. It works to address the transportation needs of tribal governments. And as you know, better transportation options contribute to the economic development of tribal communities. Last year, I worked with my Republican colleague on this committee, Senator Thune, to develop bipartisan legislation that bolsters the Tribal Transportation Program and provides flexibility for tribes in Arizona. And I'm looking forward to continuing that work with Senator Thune and with you in your new position. So I'd ask you to just pay attention to this project and work with Senator Thune and I as we support tribal communities throughout Arizona and the country.
I will. Very important to build up the right kind of visibility and connectivity with tribal nations, and I'd welcome the chance to work with you on that as well.
Thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and I thank Mr. Buttigieg for being here today.
Thank you very much, Senator Sinema. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for Mr. Buttigieg for being before the committee today, and thank you for the phone call that we shared, I think, several weeks ago. I really appreciate that. As you know, I serve on Commerce, but I also serve on the EPW committee, which has quite a bit of jurisdiction in terms of transportation. Last year, we were able to, in the last Congress, have a bipartisan America's Transportation Infrastructure Act. We call it ATIA. We had, I think, a good compromise between Republicans and Democrat asks and wants, and we were able to win the entire EPW committee, both Republicans and Democrats, in unanimous consent for this bill. But unfortunately, we were unable to get it across the line. I guess what I'm certain that you've probably given this earlier today, and I haven't seen it, but I would like to ask for your commitment that, if confirmed, you'll work with me and others to craft a reauthorization bill that does satisfy both sides of the aisle and both parties in both chambers.
Yes, let me say I admire the bipartisan character of the EPW bill, and I'm looking forward to learning more about that and building on it as we move forward.
Well, great, thank you. I think that's going to be something we're going to be under a time frame, and as you've probably already figured out here in Washington, deadlines are good if we stick to them, and we're known for not sticking to some of them at times. So let's stick to this one. I think the certainty of having the funding sources in play and the priorities in play certainly helps all of our states in terms of commitments and moving projects forward. So I look forward to that. In October of 2020, Virgin Hyperloop announced the selection of West Virginia, and we were elated, as the new home for their Hyperloop certification center. It's an exciting new mode of transportation and has the potential to transform the way Americans travel. It's a high-speed rail. But this new mode of transportation, continuing to develop, it's sort of falling in between the different regulatory environments, and we want to make sure that we are balancing innovation with ensuring passenger safety, but also being able to move this along. I think it's going to be critical for our future. So would you commit to working with me to build on the work that has already been done to examine the proper regulatory framework for emerging technologies like Hyperloop? And I'm wondering if you have any perspective on that and other emerging technologies.
Thank you. Yes, this reminds me of some of what we were discussing earlier when it comes to automated vehicles, and Hyperloop is another example where technology is being developed, industry is advancing, and we have to make sure the regulatory framework keeps up, both that it keeps up in terms of securing our safety and other goals, and that it keeps up in terms of making sure that these new technologies can flourish in a safe way. And so I'm eager to work with you on making sure that we do that, knowing all of the emerging technologies that are set to mature in the 2020s.
Well, Secretary Chow, during her stewardship, created, with the help of Congress, a regulatory framework sort of so that people who are Virgin Hyperloop and others have a place to go to find out the answers. So I look forward to working with you and that entity to make sure that we're moving that along. I'm not going to ask you about how you're going to pay for the transportation bill, because if you had an answer for that, and all of us did, there's a lot of ideas out there, but it's not as easy as we all make it sound, is it? I don't think so. So I'm going to skip that one because I'm certain that you've been asked about that. I do want to talk about Something else I mentioned to you, which is the completion of the Appalachian Highway development system that was conceived in the 60s to open up Appalachia. There is one very important project remaining in that, important to my state, Quarter H. It's moving towards completion, but it's still pretty rugged territory, and we need to have that commitment. So I would like to ask you to work with me to continue this commitment to see the completion of Quarter H as it moves through as the last phase of the Appalachian Development Highway System. So any comments you might want to make there?
I certainly want to learn more about this this important initiative, and yes, I recall you raising this in our prior conversation, and would welcome a chance to work with you on this.
Well, when we complete it together, we'll ride those hills through the beautiful venues and sceneries of West Virginia, because it's going to be it's really going to open up a part of our state that will be able to benefit not just from tourism but economic development and other things. And after all, that's what transportation corridors are for, and so along with safety, I'm very, very excited about it. But thank you for being here. Congratulations on your nomination, and I look forward to seeing the next steps. Thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you very much, Senator Capito. Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Buttigieg, thank you for being with us today, for your commitment to serving our nation. I really appreciated our very productive meeting. I look forward to learning more about your plans to invest in our nation's infrastructure, support Nevada's travel and tourism economy, and create all those new transportation infrastructure jobs that we need. And, you know, amidst a global pandemic that has really devastated our economy, I really urge this committee to facilitate a swift confirmation of Mr. Buttigieg so that he can immediately get to work on all the things that our colleagues on this committee have asked for our nation and their states as well. I want to build a little bit of, just briefly make a comment on what Senator Sinema said about I-11. Of course, Nevada and Arizona, we are the both fast-growing states out west, and we are not connected between Las Vegas and Phoenix. Our infrastructure just hasn't kept up with that explosive growth. So we need significant transportation investments, our new highway infrastructure, not just to repair the old highways. And that investment must include a new Interstate 11 that runs from the Mexican border through Phoenix and through Las Vegas up through the northern half of my state. It is extremely important. This remains one of the top infrastructure priorities, and I think it's one of the few remaining metropolitan areas that aren't connected directly by interstate. So I appreciate that you made a commitment to Senator Sinema on that, and we'll look to work together with the Arizona delegation and you to do that. But I want to build also on aviation, travel, and tourism. Nevada, travel and tourism, of course, are the lifeblood of our economy. Our airports, well, they're the gateway to our great state. Millions of domestic, international tourists and business travelers. And in 2019 alone, just one of our airports saw over 50 million passengers, generated $35 billion in economic output, supported over 250,000 jobs, and was responsible of 18% of our region's gross domestic product. That's why economic slowdown has been so devastating. And so the travel slowdown, of course, it's meant job losses, not only at our amazing hotels and casinos, our convention halls, but at the airports themselves, from gate agents, concessionaires, all the related small businesses that support all of that. And in order to fully recover from the pandemic, we have to work on economic growth and invest in our aviation, airports, and tourism generally. So I'm hoping that you'll commit to working with me to ensure that the Biden administration's infrastructure package will invest in our nation's airports, and that future COVID relief packages continue to support airports through small concessions and small businesses.
I'd look forward to it. One of the best parts of campaigning in your state was getting to know the extraordinary workers. I know how much they have been impacted by what's happened, and you have my commitment to work together to support them.
And of course, we don't have all those businesses without the great travelers that come to our wonderful, especially Southern Nevada, for the Las Vegas Convention Center. And so we need to work on policies that are going to increase the confidence in the traveling public, in business, that we can have conventions, that they can go on vacation. And so how do you think that you're going to work on trying to build some of this confidence back in our aviation safety after the pandemic and promote our tourism economy?
Well, the most important thing, I think, is a perception and a reality of safety in air travel. And the idea of safety in air travel had one kind of meaning a year ago. It's taken on additional meaning now in the context of the pandemic. It's one of the reasons why I think executive action on mask mandates is so important. And we should do everything else that we can to make sure that passengers know that they'll have a safe experience, which has always been the mission of the FAA and the DOT, but of course now has taken on new meaning in the COVID era.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I think I have time for one more question. So I want to talk about something that we discussed a little bit, which is Yucca Mountain and nuclear waste disposal. And, you know, Nevadans, we just refuse to let our state be the nation's nuclear dumping ground. For 30 years, we've opposed the Yucca Mountain nuclear waste disposal project, in part because it would require transporting nearly 9,500 rail casks in 2,800 trains and 2,650 trucks across the country to Nevada. This is a major transportation crisis waiting to happen. It puts major metropolitan areas in 44 states, their freeways and their railways at risk of millions of Americans. It will require 300 miles of new railroad and take over 50 years at 3 loads per week by truck or by train to move all this nuclear waste. So it's a huge expense, it's a huge risk, and we have an aging rail system, and consistent shipments of these heavy casks are just going to cause wear and tear, let alone the safety and some of the bottlenecks. If you go by train, you have to go through the same 4 major metropolitan areas 3 times a week for 50 years with spent nuclear waste. I just think that would be unacceptable to those 4 cities and states as well.
So what do you think,
Secretary
Mr. Mayor?
of Transportation, you have jurisdiction over the rail lines, jurisdiction on the transportation of hazardous materials by rail via your department's Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration and its Office of Hazardous Materials Safety. So with that in mind, given the safety concerns, the economic concerns, and that the fact that Nevada has never consented to this project, will you commit to opposing dangerous shipments to Yucca Mountain?
I'm committed to making sure that there are solutions that everybody believes in, and I share the concerns that you've raised, not just from the Nevada perspective, but all across the route.
And I see that I'm over my time. I look forward to having more discussions with you on that. I appreciate your time here today, your willingness to serve our country. I thank you for your service in our military, and look forward to working with you if you come out of committee. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you again, Mayor. In my introduction of you this morning, I referenced a couple of projects I'm very proud of because during my tenure in the U.S. Senate, I've worked hard to secure funding for and to elevate the importance of some of the priority Hoosier projects we have around the state. One of those is the West Lake Corridor project, of which you're very familiar. The other, the South Shore Double Track project that you're even more familiar with. We have received a combined $500 million in funding. As we look forward, as you look forward, we're looking at 2 major projects, Interstate 69, you're familiar with that, and the Ohio River crossing from Evansville over to Henderson, Kentucky. Would you commit to working with me to try and see those projects to fruition and identify funding streams in conjunction with an infrastructure bill?
I very much look forward to working with you on that.
Okay. And do you think you might visit the state of Indiana? And
safe to say I'll turn up there from time to time.
Okay, great. Well, I'll consider that a formal invitation to come back home, right?
Sounds good.
So one of the things we discussed on the phone as we were discussing your nomination some days ago was stretching each federal dollar a little bit further and identifying ways to do that. And we want to balance some equities and public policy considerations here. And I know that's something both of us take very seriously. But the permitting and review process, I know, can be frustrating to state stakeholders, to local stakeholders, and probably even to some federal officials in the building from time to time. As we look at ways to improve infrastructure, we commit to working with Congress to identify ways to streamline, in a responsible fashion, the federal permitting and review process in order to expedite safe project delivery of key infrastructure projects.
I think we should take every opportunity to make sure that these processes are efficient, that as much as is possibly doable, consistent, of course, with those safety and environmental goals, that they are speedy, that they're not duplicative, and I'd welcome ways to work on that together.
Okay. One specific opportunity I say that I've identified to do that, as have others, is NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. It's an important law. It requires federal agencies to consider the environmental effects of proposed federal actions. This is an important step in the overall process. I just want to underscore that. However, it seems like maybe an area that can be improved. There's a recent effort to make improvements to this law. In fact, last year, the Council on Environmental Quality announced a final rule to modernize NEPA. And in that final rule, they established a 2-year goal for completion of environmental reviews, a time frame that I think strikes most people as reasonable. Do you and the administration support these recent efforts to set a 2-year shot clock, as it were, for completion of environmental review of transportation and infrastructure projects?
So NEPA is certainly something I encountered as mayor. It came into play, of course, on that South Shore project. And I'm aware of this adjustment that's been made, but want to learn a little bit more about it. I know it'll be on the agenda for CEQ, and we'll make sure to be at the table when that's being discussed.
Okay. We'll continue to work with you, with your indulgence, on that effort, because it's something that strikes me as a real opportunity to get more on-time delivery and to stretch those dollars a little bit further, as our constituents would like us to do. I know funding is what so much of this comes down to, as we discussed in our conversation. We're going to have to work together, Congress and the administration, on identifying proper funding mechanisms. One way that we might leverage each federal dollar a bit more is by adopting something that's been done in previous infrastructure proposals, the so-called incentives program. This incentivizes state and local governments, perhaps regional entities as well, to establish significant new non-federal revenue streams dedicated to infrastructure projects. What are your thoughts on the multiplier effect that an incentive program could create by encouraging states to follow Indiana's lead, frankly, and establish dedicated new revenue streams for state infrastructure projects?
I think that it's really important to consider that multiplier effect. A well-crafted program can leverage dollars to do a lot more. As you point to, we saw a lot of that in Indiana, and my region benefited. And, I think it's likely, as we see the scope and scale of the hoped-for infrastructure work to happen this year, that we'll have an opportunity to contemplate new policy design on how to get that out the door.
Do you anticipate any counterpoints or counter-arguments to adoption of an incentives program?
I'd want to make sure that it's crafted in the right way, because I've found that anytime I think something's a no-brainer, somebody will raise a concern. But certainly in principle, that idea of leveraging dollars to get more bang for your buck is one I enthusiastically embrace.
Well, we too have shot clocks. Mine's only 5 minutes, and I'm already 30 seconds over. So I'll look forward to continuing this conversation and supporting your confirmation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Young. Mr. Buttigieg, in terms of stretching local dollars, one thing we've found in past eras where interest rates were dropping is that the use of advanced refunding techniques allowed state and local governments to refinance at lower interest rates while still holding harmless the holders of the bonds. Are you familiar with this proposal, and do you agree that this is one way to provide additional financing tools for state and local?
Thanks for raising that, Senator. Yes, as mayor, a few things gave me more fiscal pleasure than to find that we could save taxpayer dollars by refunding previously existing debt, especially since we, of course, do our accounting on a cash basis. So I think this holds a lot of promise for relief to local government.
I will tell you, Senator Stabenow and I had legislation during the last Congress that we were not able to get across the finish line, but she and I will be working together to try to make the case for this, and it would I would appreciate it if you would do so also. I'm required to ask this question. The committee has a history of asking nominees to state on the record that they pledge to work with Congress and the committee in a cooperative manner. So if confirmed, Mr. Buttigieg, will you pledge to work collaboratively with this committee and provide thorough and timely responses to our requests for information as we work together to address important policy issues?
I do, and I will.
Thank you very much. And I understand you had a birthday earlier this week.
That's true, Chairman.
Right. Now, you ran for President of the United States. Were you actually constitutionally qualified?
Not by much, but just made the cut.
Okay, and you were on the Tonight Show last night with Jimmy Fallon.
Yes, sir.
And you're on the Morning Joe show this morning. In terms of a thrilling experience, how does being before this committee today compare to those?
I would characterize this as a unique experience, Chairman.
Right. Very well said. I'm told that Senator Cantwell is finished with her questions. And so I think it is appropriate now to say that the hearing record will remain open till the end of this day. Senators are asked to submit any questions for the record by the close of business today, Thursday, January 21st, 2021. The committee asked the witness, upon receipt of any questions for the record, that you submit your written answers to the committee as soon as possible, but no later than close of business on Tuesday, January 26, 21. Can you do that, Mr. Mayor?
Gladly.
And let me check with staff and make sure we have dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. And with that, I conclude the hearing. I thank the witness and thank members of the committee for their cooperation. This hearing is closed.